Hello and greetings, my friend. Welcome to day 8 here in the 24 Days of Beautiful Strength Challenge here on the Red Delta Project YouTube channel. I'm Matt Schifferly, and today we're looking at a couple of technical details to help you build not only stronger, but much more aesthetically pleasing legs. Because don't mock the idea that the physique is only from the waist up. Lots of times people notice legs more than anything else, especially since they're usually the things that are most associated with true functional strength and ability. But unfortunately, a lot of times, especially in calisthenics, people have trouble really developing much as far as muscular shape and size in their lower body because a lot of progressive calisthenics techniques are a lot more of a skill-based exercise for many people who struggle with the wibble wobble of things like pistol squats and stuff, which makes it harder to really create a stimulus for hypertrophy. And that's why today we're exploring two very simple exercises that can really make a difference in not only your strength and athleticism, but also your aesthetic shape of your lower body, and they're much lower on the whole skill and proficiency scale. Now, the first of these humble exercises is the Sissy squat, one of the best, bar none, direct exercises for working the quadriceps, which can really build up the shape of your thighs. But sometimes the quads are not quite as well engaged with big compound movements as some people would like. Sissy squats solve that problem. But a lot of folks will rightfully say, oh, it can be really hard on the knees and they can be really hard on like your ankles and your toes and stuff. And I used to be one of those people because they were really hard on my knees. They really were terrible on my joints, but that's because I didn't know what I was doing. The key with the Sissy squat is to engage all of the muscles in your lower body. So even though there's a big emphasis on your quadriceps, you don't want to isolate the quadriceps in any way, which means calves are still on, engage your hamstrings, and more importantly, get those glutes fired up like crazy. So I am effectively forcing a big amount of hip extension, so I'm pushing forward. I always recommend starting on the bottom position as well. This way you can kind of get all that tension set in the most difficult position and you don't have to figure it out on your way down during your first repetition. I'm using a simple base block here for the sake of stability, but I'm not going to push down into the bar. Vertical posts or even just putting a hand on the wall is something I recommend doing, so it's not as much of a skill exercise. We want to make it about just delivering brutal strength and muscular endurance to stimulate hypertrophy. The more you lean back, the more weight you put on your toes, so that's going to be more resistance as well. So I take a second to just tense everything in my lower body, and I'm not trying to lift my knees up, I'm trying to drive my force down into my toes. So leaning back, shoulders are back, and I drive straight up to full extension of the knees. Now I'm using this pad here because I have a long, old school Taekwondo injury that prevents the toes on my right foot from really bending backwards. So if you have discomfort in your toes from doing this, using something of a thick pad or even a good size pillow, this is an Airex pad, will help to alleviate that stress. Come down. You don't need to come down all the way. You can just simply come down to here if that's what you're comfortable with or you have the range of tension for in your quads. But if you can drop down, that can work very well. You want to think of pushing your knees down and forward, keeping tension. Don't release the tension as we talked about with pull-ups the other day. Driving down and up, again, not leaning too much on the bar. And if you want to add more resistance, it's as simple as leaning back or even placing a hand behind your back. And just that alone can significantly increase the amount of work on your quadriceps, so that you're really creating a lot of emphasis in building up those quads. And then the second exercise that does a lot for the aesthetics of your lower body is, of course, your calves. I always get complimented on my calves more than anything else. In fact, a lot of people will come up to me and be like, what do you do for your legs? Because they're noticing my calves above all else. And that's always typically one of those muscle groups that a lot of people have issues with developing. And yeah, sure, I know there's that idea of like, well, it's all genetics and stuff, but that's how, aesthetics are governed to a large degree anyway. But it's also because a lot of folks do really, really piss poor calf training. And the tips that we have in the Sissy squat apply just as much for good calf work. Again, we want to start kind of in a bottom position, but while we're putting a heavy emphasis on the calves, we don't want to isolate in any way, which means calf training is still a full lower body exercise. So I'm engaging the quads to fully extend and lock my knees, not hyperextending, mind you, but just keeping them really rigid. And I'm also engaging my glutes and hamstrings to a very high degree. So I'm extending my hips, and that not only puts more weight onto the balls of my feet, but it prevents me from leaning forward. So now all the weight's on my hands, and there's nothing really working on my calves. Now I'm using the same base block that I use for the Sissy squats, but I usually prefer a wall that gives me some stability. So again, it's a strength exercise, not a skill exercise, but that way I can't push down onto it. But nonetheless, I'm just gonna have light fingertip pressure here. Glutes and quads are on, engaging well, simple calf block, but you can certainly do this on the floor, and tension engagement in the calves in the bottom position. Don't release the tension. If you don't get very low, that's perfectly fine. Lots of folks have trouble sufficiently engaging their calves and turning them on, which is one of the reasons they struggle to grow, but also engaging them through a range, so as soon as they come down, they lose the tension. So even though my heels are dropping down nice and low, there's no tension in the muscles, so of course there's no benefit. So by keeping tension in the calves and the glutes and hamstrings and the quads, all of my lower body is working very hard. I have very little tension or weight on my fingertips. And now this really works and smokes out the calves to a much higher degree. And you don't need like a lot of weight on your back, like in a Smith machine or anything either. Just holding a dumbbell works well. And of course, single leg variations will be pretty intense when you ensure you have full lower body engagement and a lot of tension in the calves throughout your full range of motion. As usual, I put a micro workout down below in the description if you want to play around with these two exercises in a little comprehensive workout. And I will be addressing glutes and hamstrings in another video coming on up, so make sure you're subscribed for the rest of the 24 days of Building Beautiful Strength Challenge. And I'll see you in tomorrow's video. Thank you very much for watching. Be fit and live free.